Hey traders, Raghee here. Let's get a quick audio and video check in. Should be good to go. All right. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Hope everyone is doing well this morning. Okay, so a couple things to recap as we kick off the morning. How many of you are watching Dark Wolf, Terminal List Dark Wolf? I this morning, I think they're going to drop the next episode. Yeah, my husband and I have been watching it. I'm not gonna, no spoilers here. I haven't watched the new episode, but what a twist in the last episode. Cannot wait to see what happens today. Yep. And I'm gonna enjoy that probably this afternoon because we're gonna spend the next approximately 2 hours looking at day trades, looking at swing trades. I'd even like to recap a little bit of the long-term account growth setups that we've sent out. Yesterday, I sent out the top tier outlook for the week of September 8th, and I wanted to go a little bit more back to basics in that update and talk about some of the positions we have. So for those of you that are brand new to the weekly chart setups, where we build a portfolio, where we look at holding stocks for months, if not years, or leaps for 12 months. You can check that out, and it'll be a great, for those of you that are brand new to the room, that most recent top tier outlook newsletter is going to be super helpful for kind of getting back up to speed with what we're doing if you've been away for a while, or a really good foundation if it's brand new to you. All right, very cool. And then we have, I also sent out, there was a video, I've been mentioning, that I'm going to cut some videos for you all based on your requests. And one of them was, Rog, what would I do if I had a small account? So I thought, a lot of folks don't know that I did start with a small account. My first account was $1,200. I was 15 and a half, but that's when I started. That was my account. I've been there, done that. I know you can grow an account. I think that number is probably way too low. That was back in 1980, whatever that was. I think a small account now that's a reasonable small account would be 5,000 to 7,000. Anything under 5 is going to have some severe limitations, but it can be done. It's just that patience muscle is going to be Mr. Olympia size by the time you develop it, which is not a bad thing, but it can be done. And I sent that video out. You can catch it on my YouTube at Raghee Horner. What steps would I take to grow a small account? And I'm going to take topics from you all. Say, hey, okay, that's a great topic. Maybe it'll be a short, maybe it'll be a video. But yep. So 40, almost 39 years ago. 38 and a half, actually. 39 and a half. Yeah. I can't do math this morning. All right. So what have we got going on here this morning? Hot zone aftermath. What happened at 8:30 this morning that could shape the open? We had the core PPI, and we also have crude oil inventories coming up at 10:30. Tomorrow's CPI, so that'll be another 8:30 a.m. hot zone, which again could shape some of the morning. The same way PPI could, maybe in a more impactful way, although inflation isn't as big a deal now, right? What is the big deal? Jobs, right? The labor market. And by the way, we had some conversation about the BLS, and I think there was some question about the revision. And I hadn't really looked at it, to be quite frank, because if it's going to be hitting the market, we're going to see it in price. If it hits the market and no one reacts, in other words, price doesn't move, nobody cares. And I had a buddy in college, and he used to always say, do you want to know or do you care? Before he said anything. And I thought, wow, what an interesting thing in trading. Can we run it through, do I want to know or do I care, as a filter, right? Do I want to know? Price will tell me. Do I care? Price will tell me, right? So too will different volume and volatility metrics. So yesterday, that BLS annual revision came out. So this went clear back to March of 2024, I believe. So this was not a revision of the previous non-farm payroll. We'll see that in the first Friday of October, right? But this was an annual revision. And look, there's a lot of spin on it, mostly political. I don't get paid to talk about politics. I detest it. But the data part of it is the pressure will remain on the FOMC to remain dovish because the employment picture based on that is a lot worse than thought. And, you got to wonder, did Powell know this? I got to believe he had some inkling. And maybe that's why they made that shift, that job emphasis on that Friday where he spoke in Jackson Hole. No one can tell. I don't know the future. I certainly can't read minds, but I can read charts. And that's always going to be our edge. The PPI miss, for those of you that are wondering, why would the equity markets, here's the S&P, here's the NASDAQ, why would it go up on a PPI miss? And the reason it goes up is because in an environment where data pressures the Federal Reserve to cut rates or not cut rates, negative data suggests more pressure to cut, and lower rates are something that stonks love, right? What else took a pretty big leap on that? We've got our long-term position in TLT looking really good. So stonks, and I remember one time I wrote down stonks and bongs. They love it. So we'll continue on with that discussion after 10:30 about some of the long-term positions that we have. Open swings this morning, and you can check out the alert in the alert section of the Sector Secrets Mastery Room, where we have bought the 19 September 43 calls. This was a tricky entry because one, yes, we do like FCX very much from the perspective of the overall relative performance of XME, the metals and mining ETF, as well as FCX itself. However, FCX got hit with news. And sometimes, look, I'm not trading the news, but I do want to know what the news was. It could have been a brokerage downgrade, no problem. It could have been, any number of things. It ended up being a very unfortunate circumstance where I believe 7 workers were stuck in a cave. They were believed to be safe, but obviously the production had to shut down. And this is a huge copper and gold mine, one of the biggest in the world. And it's run by Freeport-McMoRan. So what we did is we looked at that event as perhaps a temporary, and for the sake of those people, yes, I hope they've been freed, and certainly it's a temporary situation. It's the same thing with a brokerage downgrade. This was not an accounting scandal. This was not some basic shift in their business model or lower demand for the metals that they're mining. This was a temporary situation that happened to disrupt one of the most active mines on the planet. So we looked at the trend, we looked at the color of the candles, we looked at the zone that it sold off into, and we bought it. Is it up a lot? No, it's not up a ton, but it's up off our buy, which was down in that area around 44.05 to 43.70. So we had a 30-cent range that we could build that conservative position size in. So we've got that position open at the moment. So our profit targets on that, remember, are either going to be 25% premium gain or 46, whichever you want to take. All right, the other position that we built yesterday was DHI, and you can see this in the recaps that I send out in the evening. You can see what was filled, where it was filled at. And on DHI, DH Horton, these were 19 September, 175 calls. We bought when price reaches down to 177.50, which was actually hit numerous times yesterday. In fact, when we sent this out, this alert went out at just after 11:30, call it 11:40, if I remember right. 11:38 is what I wrote down. So this got sent out 11:38. So right around here, the alert was sent out. And then you can see how many times we kind of went lower. In fact, we got down to 176.80. It wasn't low enough for the moderate, but it was low enough to get numerous opportunities at that 177.50 trigger and build that long call position with the 175 calls. So you can see that, let's say I send out the alert and price rallies like it did. And, frankly, sometimes we have the largest mastery here at Simpler. And sometimes that rally could sometimes just temporarily be our bids. And we come in and buy at a floor, and then other folks will see that and come in after us. But then look, it came back down again and again. And so getting that fill sometimes may not be right at the alert time, but remember, it's valid for the day. All right. Okay, so let's get to work. We want to now shift, after a quick recap of the morning, we want to shift now to our 5-minute time frame and take a look at what, if any, day trades are forming. All right, so let's head on over to S&P, NASDAQ, Russell, Dow. And what I'm going to look for here is an opportunity to look for one of our core setups. We have just a handful of them, right? The longer I trade, the fewer setups I have, right? The more automation I embrace. So what are our core setups? I'm looking for, and we're going to keep a really strict adherence to above or below the previous session close. Well, right now, I want to focus on symbols that are above the previous session close, that are either at the hourly price movement range, the wave, or have a Darvis that has formed. The other thing that I want to do is wait 5 minutes, right? What's going to happen in that 5-minute window? I'm going to wait 5 minutes for spreads to normalize as volume comes in, right, on the bell. Volume comes in. So we're going to wait that 5 minutes. That means we're not going to do anything until even 9:35. All right, pup wants to come back in. All right, hang on one second. All right, puppy, want to come back in? It's hot out there. Come on. All right. So pup's back in the. We do have the pup indicator today. We do. We have the pup indicator. All right. If you have any questions, by the way, feel free to type them on in, and I will tackle those. Let's keep them to day trades or maybe the management of our swings. But if you take a look here, we're going to often get a candle of unusual size. All right, what does that mean, Ron? Candle of unusual size. Candle of unusual size. Right at the bell, we're going to get a lot of orders that are getting filled, a lot of opinions. So we have a COUS. This is typical of the first 5 minutes. And we know it's an unusual size because when we look at the candles, say 5, I like to stick to about 5 that preceded it, this is clearly larger. Again, a great reason to sit on the sidelines for at least 5 minutes. Now, in the meantime, are any of the symbols that we're looking at in trends? No, I do not see a trend. Are any of the symbols I'm looking at near the hourly price movement range? No. So in the first opening moments, I'm looking at the futures contracts. They've been already trading for hours and hours. So Bitcoin, crude oil, bonds, gold, Russell, Dow, S&P, NASDAQ. We're going to take a look at those first. Then we'll start to at around 9:35. I'll start to take a look at the sectors on the intraday multi-chart. If you are in the room and want to scan on over to RH screen number 2, you can see the intraday multi-chart sectors. Okay, so I want to get a read at the top level first, right? I want to get a read on what the indices and some of these key futures contracts are doing before I dial down to an individual stock, before I dial it down to a sector, right? We'll get there after we get a good read on the broader averages. Okay, next will be, all right, let's see. Jeremy's mentioning AMD. All right, let's go take a look at that. AMD. Now, the only way that I would want to trade AMD, so if we start at the stock level, that's cool. But if I'm going to trade AMD, what would the alignment look like? Alignment would be NASDAQ, semiconductors, to then finally AMD, right? So that's how we would look at that particular name. And you can see it's pretty volatile in the open. I mean, wow, it went to the red and the green zone all at once. But which direction am I interested in going in? Which direction do I want to trade AMD in? Well, this is where the handy dandy previous session close is going to be the determining factor. So if I'm above the previous session close, which we are, and I'm looking for support in this area, which is the hourly price movement range, it's a neutral structure, as you can see there, but a ton of volatility. I mean, we've gone up to this high and right down somewhere to this low. We have a ton of volatility. Yeah. So we have to accept that as part of what we're dealing with. I am bullish the NASDAQ and I am bullish SMH. Let's take a look at that really quickly. We've got at least the last 5 minutes. We got the first 5 minutes out of the way. SMH is pretty strong. What about NVIDIA? Taiwan Semi. So the volatility in AMD is somewhat unique to AMD, although Taiwan Semi was pretty volatile. But the volatility in AMD is pretty unique to AMD. So that's a little troubling, right? You look at SMH, you look at NASDAQ, they're ticking up right now, right? See how AMD is pushing lower? I'm not saying there's not a trade to be had, but it is interesting. If you're wondering, as a stock on its own journey, like we discovered Freeport-McMoRan yesterday was, look at NAS, it's trying to tick up, right? Look at SMH, same thing. And then here's AMD. So that's how we go through the alignment. If looking at AMD means, well, it's very volatile, maybe one way to deal with the volatility is focus on the moderate to the conservative zone. We'd be looking at 160.85 down to about 160.14. But AMD is much weaker than its counterparts, right? So I would want to give this another 5 minutes. That's where I would want to give this another 5 minutes or so. So the lack of alignment is a warning. Okay. Yes, it's in the green zone, but remember, it's not just the green zone that's going to get our attention. It's the combination of those things to get the alignment. All right. But great question, Jeremy. Yeah. Look, I think to look at AMD at face value, it's definitely worth a look. So good eyes. The other thing, though, is when you start to see that the sector and the index it belongs to isn't as weak as it, whoa, we got to give it a moment. Yeah. Now, that doesn't mean there may not be something else in that group that might be worth looking at. It doesn't mean that maybe, NVIDIA or SMH could not be opportunities. Yeah. Okay. All right. Moving on then to, the ES. Let's take a look at the S&P here for a moment. The S&P, here we go, has this Darvis. It's above the previous session close. So here's the Darvis I'm talking about right there. It's above the previous session close. One of the things that I'd like to see is that it's oversold. It's not at the moment. It is a neutral structure. And when we have neutral, meaning we're moving sideways on the trend and the momentum, by the way, so sideways, I'd like to see, it's the funniest name I've ever given an indicator, I'd like to see the secret squiggle oversold. That would be great confirmation. So these are the most conservative ways that I could look at a setup. So if I think about the box I want to check, above or below the previous session close, do I have a Darvis? In this case, I do. Is it neutral? Yes, it is. And do I have an oversold reading? No, I don't. And if you think about setups like a checklist, I recommend Checklist Manifesto by Atul Gawande as a great read for traders. It has nothing to do with trading, everything to do with thinking, which is what trading is, asking and answering questions, and then seeing if what price action is doing fits the mold for high probability setups. At the moment, S&P doesn't, right? At the moment, S&P does not. All right. So let's move on to, let's see what else we have here. Bonds here. Okay, so let's talk about the same situation here in bonds. Neutral structure. Here's my Darvis. We've got to get down in this area before I can do anything. And I'd love to see an oversold read. That's really it. That's really it, gang. So when we're neutral, secret squiggle, or the top tier slow stow, right? And I'd like to see that confirm at the support level that it's oversold. Okay. Now it's 9:40, so that means we're going to start to switch on over to start to look at some of the sectors, right? Now, the best looking sectors when price action is above the previous session close are going to be bullish sectors, preferably in a trend or at least bullish momentum. And right now, as far as bullish trends go, we have XLI. As far as just bullish momentum, we've got SMH, XLE, IYT, XME, which is great for our Freeport McMoran position, gold miners, and utilities, right? So if I'm looking at strength in the NASDAQ, and as long as it stays above 23,889, I'm looking for strength in the NASDAQ. As long as I've got strength there, I'm going to look at bullish sectors. That's going to be mostly semiconductors. So looking at the whole Mag 7 or Awesome 8 is not necessarily going to be helpful. Why don't I like Apple? Why am I not interested in Apple? Remember, we just came off a product announcement, and there's usually weakness in Apple after a product announcement. Going into those product announcements, they announced the iPhone 17,307. The anticipation usually sends price action higher, and clearly the market is not impressed with an iPhone Air, right? I'm not mocking Apple. I'm just saying this is a typical reaction post event. We have to know these events, right? You have to know these events. All right, what do we know about some of the other sectors that we've had our eye on? Google's been an outperformer, generally speaking, in the group. Google belongs to the XLC. The XLC is in a downtrend, as is the XLY. So I want to be really careful with tech stocks right now. Where I want to be focused on is mostly semiconductors and then maybe stocks within the XLK. Maybe Microsoft, right? So far, not looking very good. Yeah. So this is why letting that first 5 to 10 minutes is so key when we're day trading. Just a quick reminder, let's circle back on over to FCX. I see a number of you have taken profits on that FCX swing from yesterday. Great. It's holding very nicely. And then we also have DHI up and then down, but no worries. No worries. It's not doing anything problematic. It's pretty much where we bought it from to begin with. So that is what we're looking at. Okay, so that's how our morning is shaping up. Always remember that first 5 minutes is not indicative of the morning, and then we'll see if price gets to, one of our core setups. If I'm going to be a buyer, it's because price action's above the previous session close. If I'm going to be a buyer or a short seller or buyer puts, it's going to be because the index is below the previous session close. XLF might be worth keeping an eye on, as is XLV, because the Dow has now tumbled below basically 45.7, and it's now putting it in bearish territory. And that way I'm going to start looking at maybe some potential bearish day trades specific to the weakness in the Dow and specific to the weakest sectors within the Dow. Focus on that alignment.